What's up, guys? Today we're going to be making a leather card case. You can follow along if you want to learn how to make this, or if you're just looking for the aesthetics of it. Today what I'm going to do is take some scraps that I made a different wallet out of and do kind of an amalgam of these three wallets that you see here. The last one being my everyday tried and true wallet that this is kind of a little bit of an adaptation of. So building on the classic card wallet structure, we're going to go for a slim design with 2 slots on each side and 1 slot in the center for bills and everything else like that. Let's get started. So right now what I'm going to do is I'm going to make some rough cuts on this leather. Very simply, I like to look over the leather that I have. I like to look over any spots with blemishes, markings, or anything like that, and make sure that I don't cut out any pieces with those things. So I'm going to trim this piece up and then cut out 4 slots. And these are, again, not precise at all. This is just for measuring out and making sure I'm getting the best pieces possible out of this leather. I'll do the same thing with the 2 back pieces. And then we have the 6 pieces that we need to put this wallet together. And again, this process is great for making sure that any blemishes or scrapes aren't included when you're picking out the pieces for your wallet. Now, to start off with, trimming down these pieces, you're going to want to do this for each piece. Now, what you like to do is, if you have a simple paper template, instead of something heavy or something plastic like that, I like to weight my templates down. That way I know nothing's moving, and I can be as precise as possible. So I'll make some rough cuts, some larger marks around the edge, with my skiving knife, and then if I need to polish things up with the X-Acto, I have that as well. But it's a lot easier when you have a straight line and you're just going piece by piece to clean that up. Now again, this process can be kind of tedious, but this is one of the most important parts, albeit one of the most overlooked parts when making anything out of leather or anything for a bag or wallet, because precision is very important here. Now what we like to do is we like to sand down the edges, just to make sure there's no peaks, valleys, or troughs on that line, because we are going to be painting that, sealing it, and polishing it. And you want to make sure that whether this is for a friend, a loved one, or a client, that you give them the best wallet that you can, both aesthetically and functionally. So just making sure those edges are smooth, we sand them with 2 different types of sandpaper, which I'll go over later. And then just a very, very thin layer of paint. Now you're going to want to do this about 2 to 3 times for each of the card slots. It is a little bit overkill to do it more than once, but to have a nice sealed product that looks great, shines, and will really stand the test of time through a bunch of wear and tear, it really makes a huge difference going those extra steps. Now, painting this gives it a nice look, and it also seals it off from any impurities. In addition to that, we use beeswax. You can use paraffin wax or really any other type of household wax that you have to seal off the edges. I like beeswax for the functional property of it, and it's always giving me a nice shine when I'm finishing up edges. And you want to use a piece of canvas or something heavy to burnish it, and really just use the friction, use that heat to melt that beeswax into the paint, and really just give that nice coat to seal things off and shine it up a little bit. Now, as you can see, this is a pretty tedious process, and again, you want to do this about 2 to 3 times for each of your edges that you are painting, sealing, and preparing. Now, I'm going to light the alcohol burner over here. Now, this burns very pure. There's no smoke, and that means that your tools won't get gunked up, because when you do use a regular burner or a lighter or anything like that, your tools get a little bit of dirt on them, it looks like. It's that soot from the burning. So here we're creasing the edges. We don't want anything marred up on there. We want a very clean edge. Now, this process is more for aesthetics than anything else. We don't use these lines to guide anything. They're really just meant as a decoration. But it is a decoration that is classic, and it really does pop and just shows that difference between something that's handmade versus factory made. So it's a nice touch, and I highly recommend doing it if you're thinking about making a wallet. Now, Because this is a chrome tanned leather, which just essentially means that it's been treated with a bunch of chemicals to make it shine and really have a beautiful finish on it, it doesn't take up to glue that well. So when you're placing all of your slots on this wallet, or for any wallet or any bag that you're using, it's good to sand down the parts that you won't see that you're gluing over, because you want to make sure you get a good contact bond between the card slot and the body of the wallet itself. Now the glue is more for holding the wallet together when you're stitching than anything, but over time around the edges and even at the seams of the card slots, it does matter, and it's very important to have that solid contact over time. So making sure that you start with it now will ensure longevity and really give you a clean finish that truly does stand the test of time. Now we want to make sure that everything's lined up properly and there's a solid bond between the leather and the other backing piece. What I like to do now is, because I oversize the pieces for the slots, I trim them down to a very, very precise edge here. And what you want to do is just take your skiving knife or any knife that you're using and punch out the excess leather. Now the reason I oversize this is because depending on how you glue, how you drape the leather over, you can have some imperfections, and the clearer the edge, the better end product. Now this is a different marking tool that I'm using here, and this one's a little bit wider, so it's not against the edge, it's not just for decoration, and I use this to mark a very clear and precise line for my hammering when I'm marking in the holes for the stitches. Now, marking the holes for a stitch is not a hard process. Essentially, you're taking a fork, it's a fancy tool here that we have to poke these edges though, and hammering it into the leather. Think of it like that. The important part about that process though is that you want to have straight stitches no matter where it is in the wallet for the functional use. You don't want something that has stitches that are out of whack. You want a clear and straight line so that, again, this wallet will have structural integrity no matter how much abuse you put it through. I'm using a stitching pony here to make sure that I have a very clear line and I can see exactly what I'm doing. I'll show you another method later, but this is the classic method to stitch together your wallet. Now, once we have the back card slots stitched in, all secured and ready to go, what I like to do is line up that front-facing slot and just put a little mark on there with the awl that I have. This way, when I line it up, even though I know the cuts are correct, I have a little bit of a visual guideline for both sanding and gluing those pieces together. Again, we're going to use the same process as before, and we're going to sand down the front-facing part of this wallet that will be tucked behind the first card slot. Now, we've already sanded the bottom, so we're just going to sand the sides, and it's time to glue everything together. And again, because we've sanded it, now we'll have a clear contact bond, and this will bring everything together very cohesively. You won't have peeling, and your process of putting this wallet together will be much easier than it would be. So, a light layer, just enough to make sure that there's a little bit of glue left over to soak up into the back of the leather, as well as a very copious amount to ensure contact over time that won't be peeling off while you try and stitch this wallet or while you're using it in the future. Now, I take off the clips that I used to secure it, and I'm going to do the same thing I did with the back card slot. As I have the oversized piece of leather draped over the front, I want to clear up this edge, and I want it to be as precise as possible. Again, this is a point that will ensure that when you're finishing the edges, you have less work to do, and you have a more uniform looking wallet, which will very, very often make you and the recipient of the wallet happy with how it looks. Now the wallet's coming together, and it's time to glue the front and back together. Just as we did a few minutes ago, we're going to glue along the edge of the back of the wallet. Now you only need to apply glue to one edge here. You don't need to do it to both of them. Could be a little bit overkill, and you might have a little bit of glue coming out of different parts of the edges that you don't want to have. So what I like to do next is, once there's enough glue on the back side of the leather, I like to just press it all together by hand. And it's pretty simple to line this up at this point because all the edges are going to be fairly uniform. I put a few clips around the edges, just close enough to make sure that the glue on the edge where I won't be stitching is going to set properly. And then from that, after letting it dry for about 10 to 15 minutes, I go ahead and I fire up the burner again, and now it's time to start making the marks for the outside stitches. Now, this process is a little bit stressful, as these marks are very hard to rectify. So you really get one shot to score the leather, and this is very important again because you're marking the stitches for the outside of the wallet. Now here I use the pricking irons again to make sure that we get a uniform stitch, and I'll usually open them up with an awl afterwards, just to make sure that that hole is open enough for both of the needles to pass through. And again, this step is very important, just to make sure everything looks straight and correct when you're done stitching. So starting off with the stitching clamp that I have here, I measure out enough thread to go around the wallet and then some, because the worst thing is getting halfway done and then figuring out that you have to restitch everything or start a new one. So I like to measure a little bit more than I need. And then after I snip it, I'll wax the thread just for structural integrity, and then I start stitching. Now, this is the traditional method. This is how most leather crafters learn, and this is the proper way to sew the leather. It's also more aesthetically pleasing. Personally, I'm self-taught, so I like to just throw the leather in my hand and use one hand to feed each needle in. It's not as pretty, it's not as efficient, but for me, I do get a cleaner stitch doing it the other way. So you'll see in a few seconds here, I do switch back to my normal way of doing it. But this is the best way to learn to start off with, and with enough repetition, it can be a very quick process with absolutely beautiful results. So whatever way you're learning to stitch leather, you have to do what works best for you. So here we'll wrap up the stitching. We'll get it to a point where we can tie off the ends, seal everything up, and then have that wallet ready for polishing and prepping in the last steps. Now, once that's done, the wallet really comes together, and we can see a little bit of what the finished product is going to look like. On to the final touches, we're going to do a little bit of edge work. First off, before we do any polishing, burnishing, or sanding, we're going to take our trusty marker, and we're going to make those clean and crisp lines on the edges just to keep things aesthetically pleasing, and again, apply those handmade touches that you really don't find on anything nowadays when it comes to luxury wallets. And it's even rarer to find in the handmade ones nowadays. So a very small addition that goes a very long way. And what we're going to do is we're going to use each of the tools that you see out here step by step to clean up these edges. So the first thing we want to do is we want to take the 500 grit sandpaper, and then after that the 1000 grit sandpaper, and just get rid of any of those peaks, valleys, and troughs on the edges. Make sure everything's as smooth as possible, just so that when we apply that paint, there's no undulation, and everything looks very clean and smooth. As you can see, after the 500 grit, which is a little bit rougher, we're going to go over with the 1000 grit, and this really just makes a nice polished area for the paint to take up on the wallet. Doesn't really get rid of any of the undulation as much as it does just clean it up. Now onto the paint. I very simply use a weight just to stand up the wallet so that the paint doesn't run down either side, but typically the paint is thin enough that you don't need to worry about that. So just to start off, a very, very thin layer, and we'll do this about 3 to 5 times on the outside edges. So we'll apply a thin layer of paint, make sure everything's fully coated, and then after that the process is very lightly sanding down the paint, sealing it, and then polishing it. So as you can see, the paint is nicely coated in a very thin layer, just enough to soak in. We're going to get rid of any potential globs or bubbles in the paint by sanding it, and this is why the process takes so long. By sanding very lightly, you remove a little bit of the paint, but you also get rid of any impurities and any imperfections. This is a necessary step to make sure that everything is as smooth as possible on the edges. Now, once we're done with that 3 to 5 step process, we're going to take this Japanese edge sealant. It's an alternative to using different gums for the leather. It's a natural agent, and what we're going to do is we're just going to get a little bit of sealant on there, and it's going to both shine up and protect that paint that we just so painstakingly put on the leather. As you can see, we're burnishing it in, we're sealing it, and this will create a little bit of a protective barrier in between the paint and the outside. Now the next addition is going to be beeswax, and burnishing with that as well, just to make sure everything is absolutely sealed, and that edge will just rinse off any impurities and stand the test of time. Now what I like to do is open up the wallet, make sure no glue or anything else has stuck in the card slots, just so the client will be able to use this as freely and easily as possible out of the box without really having to use any break-in period. And then I use a horsehair brush to clean off the wallet, make sure everything is as presentable as possible, and just to really see that beautiful calf leather shine. And now we've finished, and thank you for taking the time to watch the video, and if you have any questions, drop a comment below, and don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe.